This is Roderick Manson. Hi, Roderick.
Hello.
How's things, okay?
Not too bad, thank you.
Well done. Now, Roderick has completed is it the 5 major SMC listings?
Well, 4, yeah. The Munros and Tops are one list. The Corbetts, Grahams and the Donalds. In reverse order of height.
Now,
This will be awkward.
How many people, Roderick, do you think? And I know it's a guess because I don't think there is a listing of the amount of people that have completed those 4 or those 5 major Scottish listings. But how many people do you think in all?
Well, there are lists on the web. Dave Hewitt keeps them of the various list completion, even Donalds and Hewitts. Oh, and Grahams. But I think the Grahams is less than 100. The Donalds is probably over 100. So put the 4 together and you're certainly in single figures. I would guess at most 40, 50.
And of course, as I said now, you're one of them.
Yeah.
So out of those major listings, what was the first one that you completed?
That would be the Donalds. That was December 2001 on Whitehill Heights, which is a fairly insignificant one above the Devil's Beef Tub near Muffet. And I completed that as a joint completion with Alan Dawson, who of course invented the Madeleines. I had to wait nearly a year while he climbed 4 in between, but I forgave him. And it was a beautiful day out. We had about 14, 15 people, something like that. And one of them brought their 1-year-old kid along, dropped his Tigger, found it, which meant we didn't have to go all the way back the same route. And it was just a really good day, a social completion in the best sense of it.
That sounds good, Roderick. And of course, to begin with, Donald's first listed by Percy Donald.
Yeah, back in the I think it was in the 30s. I think, I'm not absolutely certain, but the criteria was very archaic, and I wouldn't attempt to try and describe it. But because there's only, I think, 140 summits, and they're all very close together as a general rule, you can really get over most of them in a fortnight. Not necessarily continuous, but you can easily do 12, 15, 20 Donalds in a day.
Well, I don't think for filming wise, Roderick, I would attempt to give the criteria used by Donald. But
wise move.
The basis of it was the hills in the Scottish Lowlands over 2,000 foot, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah. But there's also distance coming into it as well, I believe.
Distance comes into it, yes, that's what complicates it.
So if we come on to the other major Scottish hill lists, now of course you're coming on to the higher mountains, aren't you, and up to the Highlands as well.
You are.
Now you're coming into Munros, Corbett and Grahams status?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah? So, now I know the answer to this next question, but what one came next, completion-wise?
Well, completion-wise, when I started off in 91 on the Munros, and very quickly I got onto Corbetts and Benvrackie, Grahams on Ben Nicailey in the Western Red Hills, and it never struck me that they were separate lists. They were hills I wanted to climb. And by the mid-90s, I'd come up with the idea that I wanted to climb at least the last Munro would be Shanavray, the last Corbett would be Carnban, because it was so close, it seemed right. Then I noticed there was the Graham next to them, Carnock and Jerrick. And I thought, well, if I take these 3 together, it's a hell of a long walk out, whichever way round I do it. So why not just do it coast to coast? And that's what we did. We started at the Dornoch Firth, walked west, and the first one to be finished was the Graham at Carnock and Jerrick. And that was about 4 o'clock in the morning, because we'd started at 9 p.m. and just walked through a summer night. It was June 2006. And it was just sublime conditions. Very little wind, that came later. And you were walking with a t-shirt in the middle of the night in Scotland.
So following the Graham, what came after?
Well, that was we dropped to the col to the west, which is pretty rough, and there's a lovely crescent moon sort of ridge takes you round to Carnban, and it's not the most remarkable Corbett, but it is miles from anywhere. It's much further out than that actually, and that was about 4.5 hours later. Longer than it should be, but it's a long walk, and I'm old.
And so that's Graham, completion, followed by Corbett completion on the same day,
Oh yes.
on the same morning by the sound of it.
Yep.
And then continuing on that ridge, what do you come to next?
You head round some rough ground, and by this time the wind was coming up. We cut round the corrie to Shanavray, and that was actually the only time in the day that there was actually mist down. Otherwise it was perfectly clear, which is good for Scotland even in summer. And we got to the summit of Shanavray about 12:15, and there were actually two Invernessians there who were also completing the Munros at the same time on the same mountain, totally unplanned. And they had whiskey.
Oh, lovely.
The guys that were with me loved it.
That sounds a good finish. Now, of course, so on this particular day, you've now finished off the listings of Grahams, followed by the Corbetts, now the Munros, and again, you then did another hill on the same day?
No, just
same walk?
No, that was the lot. We just straight down, and by this time we were staggering a bit. Just down to Loch Broom, quick paddle in Loch Broom, and then we went up to Tongue, stayed the night at Tongue, and climbed Ben Hope the next morning, because Ben Hope was my first Munro, closing the circle.
That's a lovely sort of end to that particular outing. But on that same walk, though, Roderick, you also completed the Munro tops. But of course, you consider the tops part of the Munros anyway, don't you?
Yeah, Hugh Munro always acted as he'd come up with 500 odd summits. It was the one list. He was after everything, and I've always felt the same way. It was when the Reverend Robertson came along that the mountains and tops began to be distinguished, and you have this modern differentiation between Munros and tops. It's not one I accept, but most people do, and if they're happy with that, it gets them out in the hills, that's fine.
Now, of course, on that particular day, as we've said a couple of times so far, Graham's, Corbetts and the Munros finished.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to differentiate between the Munros and the tops, and I know obviously you don't believe that, but if you did separate those two groupings, the tops were also completed on the same walk, weren't they?
Well, at Shanavray, all Munros are tops, so Shanavray was my final top. The final non-Munro was the Bastier Tooth, and that took me 6 attempts to get up it, for various reasons.
So how many other people have actually completed those major listings on the same day, Roderick?
On the same day, in the same walk, only one person has done Munros, including tops, and Grahams and Corbetts, and that was an Irishman called Brian Ringland. He was actually the first to do it. We actually have arguments on this, because he started on Loch Hourn, which is a sea loch. He finished on Loch Hourn, which is still a sea loch, so he says that's a coast to coast. That's been going for 4 years, that argument.
Now, does Brian give a name to the people that have done that, and only 2 in the list so far?
He does. He takes the first 2 letters from Munros, Corbetts and Grahams, makes an anagram. He calls them rumcogs.
Rumcogs.
He actually tries to get as many combinations of Munros, Grahams and Corbetts as he can. I think he's up to 40 at the moment.
You see, so as far as rumcogs are concerned, there's just 2 of you.
Just the 2 of us.
You and Brian.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Roderick, it's been fascinating listening to you concerning talking about the major Scottish listings, and of course all of these listings, they're in the SMC published tables, aren't they?
They are.
Because
along with the Firths in England and Ireland, of course, and Wales, how could I forget Wales? I'm talking to a Welshman.
But of course there are many other listings to Scottish mountains, but these are the ones purely that the SMC concentrate on,
That's
aren't
right,
they?
yes.
Yeah. Well, Roderick, many thanks for your time. Been great to meet you, because we haven't met before, have we?
We have not. No, we've corresponded but not met.
Yeah, and fancy meeting you next to a lovely little pretty flowing stream behind you. Where could we be?
I wonder.
Okay, cheers, Roderick. Anyway,
Thank you very much.
thanks.